large group, BAE Systems. What's more, the design and manufacture of aircraft had become so complex and expensive that Britain really couldn't afford to build aircraft on its own. Partnerships needed to be formed with allies in Europe and the United States with varying degrees of success. One of the first examples of multinational cooperation was the Panavia Tornado. Panavia was formed by the aerospace industries of Britain, Germany and Italy specifically to build one type of aircraft. After TSR-2 was cancelled, the RAF had to make do with a variety of acquisitions. In May 1969, the three partner nations signed a memorandum committing themselves to building a completely new aircraft. In August 1974, the Tornado flew for the first time. They called it a multi-role combat aircraft, which meant that it had to be both a bomber and a fighter. It also had variable geometry wings, which could be set straight for low-speed flight, such as when taking off and landing, but then swept back for supersonic flight. The Tornado has been very successful, with nearly 1,000 being built. Its first test in combat came during the Gulf War in 1991. Since then, it has taken part in a number of conflicts, including Bosnia and Afghanistan. There are two versions, the GR-4 bomber, which replaced the Vulcan and Buccaneer in RAF service, and the ADV fighter variant, which filled the air defence role. But even as the Tornado was entering service, the RAF had already identified its need for a new fighter. After decades of delays due to political infighting and technical setbacks, the Eurofighter finally entered RAF service in October 2008. Originally conceived as an incredibly agile air superiority fighter, Eurofighter has had to adapt to very different types of conflict in which air combat plays no part. As a result, its role has expanded to include ground attack, a role it has performed in Libya and Afghanistan. But is it a British aircraft? Like the Tornado, it is built by a multinational consortium, with Spain joining Germany, Italy as well as the UK, although in investment terms Britain is the largest partner. Britain's civil aviation industry has followed a similar trajectory as its military aircraft industries. Even before the war was over, a committee chaired by Lord Brabazon foresaw a time when Britain would need civil airliners, especially for short-haul routes. The Vickers-Viscount was the world's first turboprop airliner and made its first flight in July 1948. The Vickers-Viscount was well received by the public for its cabin conditions, which included pressurization, reductions in vibration and noise, and panoramic windows. It became one of the most successful and profitable of the immediate post-war transport aircraft. 445 Viscounts were built for a range of international customers, including North America. The Viscount was replaced by the BAC 111 in 1965. By now, Vickers had merged with other aerospace companies to form the British Aircraft Corporation. The aircraft proved to be popular with domestic airlines and with various international operators. Over half of the 111 sales at launch were to the largest and most lucrative market, the United States. The 111 was one of the most successful British airliner designs and served until a widespread retirement in the 1990s, which was partially due to the introduction of aircraft noise restrictions in many European countries. The de Havilland Comet was the world's first jet airliner. After various modifications to the original specification, the aircraft that first flew in July 1949 was an all-metal 36-seat airliner powered by 4 jet engines. The new aircraft passed trouble-free testing with flying colours. The primary operator, BOAC, was happy with their own testing, and the aircraft went into production, with the first 10 Comet 1s being delivered through the summer of 1952. Overseas orders flooded in as BOAC halved their previous flying times to destinations such as Tokyo and South Africa. The Comet 4 was used by BOAC to open up the first ever transatlantic jetliner route to the United States in October 1958. The 19 Comet 4s of BOAC flew an astonishing 27 million miles in their first 2 years of operation. In 1961, de Havilland received its first orders for the Comet 4 from Britain's Royal Air Force, beginning a relationship with the aircraft that would last 50 years. These first 5 aircraft for Transport Command carried troops and their families across the world, as well as ambulance duties, carrying wounded servicemen back to the UK until 1975. Although not strictly a Comet, the RAF's successful maritime patrol aircraft, the Hawker Siddeley Nimrod, was an extremely modified Comet. The first of 49 aircraft entered service in 1969 and became a vital part of the RAF's defensive capabilities until 2010. In March 1957, BOAC issued a specification for an even longer range aircraft to fly the African and Australian routes, and would need to be capable of taking off and landing at high altitudes and in hot countries. Vickers had already experimented with a design based on 4 rear-mounted engines, and now this design was tailored to meet BOAC's requirements. Almost instantly, the benefits of the Vickers design seemed to mirror the needs of BOAC. Allowing for the fact that this new aircraft could also fly the transatlantic routes, BOAC signed a contract for 35 VC-10s in January 1958. Even as the first VC-10s were being built, Vickers developed a longer and higher capacity version called the Super VC-10. Now, there were 2 versions available, the Standard, which carried 135 passengers, and the Super, with up to 212 seats. But by this time, the huge US manufacturers such as Boeing and Douglas dominated the international market with cheaper and more economical aircraft. Although the VC-10s were successful at BOAC, they rapidly went out of service by 1974, with the Super VC-10s following just 6 years later. However, the aircraft enjoyed a substantially longer life in the Royal Air Force. 14 were ordered for the RAF and were initially used as transports, carrying up to 150 troops and potentially their families. In 1984, the RAF began to get further VC-10s for use as tankers. In this refuelling role, the aircraft stayed in service until the autumn of 2013, more than 50 years after the type's first flight. But perhaps Britain's greatest aviation achievement was Concorde, which was a joint project with France. Although the Russian-built Tupolev Tu-144 beat Concorde into the air, it only ever flew 55 scheduled flights before technical problems led to it being confined to carrying cargo. Concorde first flew in 1969. So much of the aircraft's technology was new, its aerodynamics, engines, wings, and so on. When it entered service in January 1976, its 4 Rolls-Royce Olympus engines could power its 9 crew and 100 passengers at just over twice the speed of sound. Although Concorde's commercial potential was stymied by environmental concerns, particularly in the all-important routes to North America, it remained in service for 27 years. Among other destinations, Concorde flew regular transatlantic flights from London and Paris to New York and Washington. It flew these routes in less than half the time of other airliners. But despite the early promise, only 20 aircraft were built. The development of Concorde was a substantial economic loss, and Air France and British Airways received considerable government subsidies to purchase them. Concorde was retired in 2003 due to a general downturn in the aviation industry after the type's only crash in 2000, the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001, and a decision by Airbus, the successor firm to Aerospatiale and BAC, to discontinue maintenance support. For many, Concorde is regarded as one of the most iconic aircraft ever built. She was a marvel of engineering and ingenuity, and like the Spitfire and Vulcan before her, eyes would turn skywards. Not only were these among the best British aircraft ever built, they were the best in the world.